Hey everybody, this is Broadzilla. I'm in my pajamas. I'm ready for bed, but not without my story. Tonight, I thought it would be fun. We could read Curious George at the Beach. I tried to find my favorite one, which is one where he goes to the hospital, but I'm not sure where it is. I'm going to find it though. I know I am. So, but for tonight, we're going to go with At the Beach. All right. So let's get this going. It's very warm today, George, said the man with the yellow hat. Let's go to the beach. The beach was very crowded on such a hot day. I'm going to change into my trunks, said the man. Look around, but don't get into trouble, George. Well, we know how often that works on Curious George. George started to explore. Someone had built a castle in the sand. People were splashing and swimming in the water. Nearby, a group of boys and girls were playing volleyball. George wanted to play too, but no one seemed to notice. So he climbed up onto the net, and when the ball came his way, he grabbed it. What fun! George climbed over the heads of the players and landed on the sand. Now he could play with them. Hey, someone shouted, give us back the ball. Then the players chased George. He was scared. He dropped the ball and ran away. Now where could he go? Then he saw a lifeguard tower. While the lifeguard was pulling his boat out of the water, George climbed the tower. George could see a lot from up here. George picked up the lifeguard's binoculars and looked through them. Everything seemed so close. He could see a little boy on the pier. Nearby, a woman was sleeping in a beach chair. George looked at the boy again. Now the boy was running. He was running straight toward a hole in the pier. He could fall through. George blew the lifeguard's whistle. Then he jumped down and ran to the pier. George reached the boy just as he was about to fall. George grabbed him. Meanwhile, the lifeguard heard the whistle and ran over to help them. Then George's friend and the woman who had been sleeping rushed over too. If it wasn't for you, the lifeguard said to George, this little boy would have been in real trouble. Thank you. The woman gave George a big hug. Thank you, she said. You saved my grandson's life. She turned to George's friend. Won't you both have something to eat with us? So they all had lunch on the beach. A hero deserves a good meal, said the woman. George agreed. The end. It was a very short book, and I remember George used to get into a lot more trouble than this, typically. But, I don't know. Maybe he mellowed out as he got older. I have a shorter one than I thought, too. But that just leaves us with more time for The Magician's Nephew, which we are going to continue with. And if I recall, we were just starting chapter 7. Here we go. Chapter 7. Now, slave, how long am I to wait for my chariot? Thundered the witch. Uncle Andrew cowered away from her. Now that she was really present, all the silly thoughts he'd had while looking at himself in the glass were oozing out of him. But Aunt Letty at once got up from her knees and came over to the center of the room. And who is this young person? Andrew, may I ask? Aunt Letty said Aunt Letty in icy tones. Distinguished foreigner. Very important person. He stammered. Rubbish, said Aunt Letty, and then, turning to the witch, get out of my house this moment, you shameless hussy, or I'll send for the police. She thought the witch must be someone out of a circus, and she did not approve of bare arms. What woman is this? Said Jadis. Down on your knees, minion, before I blast you. No strong language in this house, if you please, young woman, said Aunt Letty. Instantly, as if, and as it seemed to Uncle Andrew, the queen towered up to an even greater height. Fire flashed from her eyes. She flung out her arm with the same gesture and the same horrible-sounding words that had lately turned the palace gates of Charn to dust. But nothing happened except that Aunt Letty, thinking those horrible words meant to be ordinary English, said, I thought as much. The woman is drunk. Drunk. She can't even speak clearly. It must have been a terrible moment for the witch when she suddenly realized that her power of turning people into dust, which had been quite real in her own world, was not going to work in ours. But she did not lose her nerve even for a second. Without wasting a thought on her disappointment, she lunged forward, caught Aunt Letty round the neck and the knees, raised her high above her head as if she had been no heavier than a doll, and threw her across the room. While Aunt Letty was still hurtling through the air, the housemaid, who was having a beautifully exciting morning, put her head in at the door and said, If you please, sir, the hansom's come. Lead on, slave, said the witch to Uncle Andrew, and he began muttering something about regrettable violence, must really protest, but at a single glance from Jadis he became speechless. She drove him out of the room and out of the house, and Diggory came running down the stairs just in time to see the front door close behind them. Jiminy, he said, she's loose in London, and with Uncle Andrew. I wonder what on earth is going to happen now. Oh, Master Diggory, said the housemaid, who was really having a wonderful day. I think Miss Ketterly hurt herself somehow. So they both rushed into the drawing-room to find out what had happened. If Aunt Letty had fallen on bare boards or even on the carpet, I suppose all her bones would have been broken, but by great good luck she had fallen on the mattress. Aunt Letty was a very tough old lady. Aunts often were in those days. After she had some sal volatile and sat still for a few minutes, she said there was nothing the matter with her except a few bruises. Very soon she was taking charge of the situation. Sarah, she said to the housemaid, who had never had such a day before, go around to the police station at once and tell them there is a dangerous lunatic at large. I will take Mrs. Kirk's lunch up myself. Mrs. Kirk was, of course, Diggory's mother. When Mother's lunch had been seen to, Diggory and Aunt Letty had their own. After that, he did some hard thinking. The problem was how to get the witch back to her own world, or at any rate out of ours, as soon as possible. Whatever happened, she must not be allowed to go rampaging about the house. Mother must not see her, and if possible, she must not be allowed to go rampaging about London either. Diggory had been in the drawing-room when she had tried to blast Aunt Letty, but he had seen her blast the gates of Charn, so he knew her terrible powers, and did not know that she had lost any of them by coming into our world. And he knew she meant to conquer the world. At the present moment, as far as he could see, she might be blasting Buckingham Palace or the Houses of Parliament, and it was almost certain that quite a number of policemen had by now been reduced to little heaps of dust. And there didn't seem to be anything he could do about that. But the rings seemed to work like magnets, thought Diggory. If I can only touch her and then slip on my yellow, we shall both go into the wood between worlds. I wonder, will she go all faint again there? Was that something the place does to her, or was it only the shock of being pulled out of her own world? But I suppose I'll have to risk that. How am I supposed to find the beast? I don't suppose Aunt Letty would let me go out, not unless I said where I was going. And I haven't got more than 2 pence. I I'd need any amount of money for buses and trams if I was looking all over London. Anyway, I haven't the faintest idea where to look. I wonder if Uncle Andrew is still with her. One sec. It seemed in the end that the only thing he could do was to wait and hope that Uncle Andrew and the witch would come back. If they did, he must rush out and get hold of the witch and put on his yellow ring before she had a chance to get into the house. This meant that he must watch the front door like a cat watching a mouse hole. He dared not leave his post for a moment, so he went into the dining room and glued his face, as they say, to the window. It was a bow window, from which you could see the steps up the front door and see up and down the street, so that no one could reach the front door without you knowing. I wonder what Polly's doing, thought Diggory. He wondered about this a good deal at first. A slow half-hour ticked on, but you need not wonder, for I am going to tell you. She had got home late for her dinner, with her shoes and stockings very wet, and when they asked her where she had been and what on earth she'd been doing, she said that she'd been out with Diggory Kirke. Under further questioning, she said she'd got her feet wet in a pool of water, and that the pool was in a wood. Asked where the wood was, she said she didn't know, and asked if it was in one of the parks. She said truthfully enough that she supposed it might be a sort of park. From all this, Polly's mother got the idea that Polly had gone off, without telling anyone, to some part of London she didn't know, and got in a strange park, and amused herself jumping into puddles. As a result, she was told that she had been very naughty indeed, and that she wouldn't be allowed to play with that Kirke boy again any more, if anything of the sort ever happened again. Then she was given dinner with all the nice parts left out, and sent to bed for solid 2 hours. It was a thing that happened to one quite often in those days. So while Diggory was staring out the dining room window, Polly was lying in bed, and both were thinking how terribly slowly the time could go. I think myself I would rather have been in Polly's position. She had only to wait for the end of 2 hours, but every few minutes Diggory would hear a cab, or a baker's van, or a butcher's boy coming round the corner and think, "Here she comes," and then find it wasn't. And between these false alarms, for what seemed hours and hours, the clock ticked on, and one big fly, high up and far out of reach, buzzed against the window. It was one of those houses that gets very quiet and dull in the afternoon, and always seems to smell of mutton. During his long watching and waiting, one small thing happened which I shall have to mention, because something important came of it later on. A lady called with some grapes for Diggory's mother, and as the dining room door was open, Diggory couldn't help overhearing Aunt Letty and the lady as they talked in the hall. "What lovely grapes!" came Aunt Letty's voice. "I'm sure if anything could do her good, these would. But poor dear little Mabel, I'm afraid it would need fruit from the land of youth to help her now. Nothing in this world will do much." They both lowered their voices and said a lot more that he could not hear. If he had heard that bit about the land of youth a few days ago, he would have thought it was Aunt Letty just talking without meaning anything in particular, the way grown-ups do, and it wouldn't have interested him. He almost thought so now, but suddenly it flashed upon his mind that he now knew, even if Aunt Letty didn't, that there really were other worlds, and that he himself had been to one of them. At that rate, there might be a real land of youth somewhere. There might be almost anything. There might be fruit in some other world that really could cure his mother. And well, you know how it feels when you begin hoping for something that you desperately want badly. You almost fight against the hope because it's too good to be true. You've been disappointed so often before, and that was how Diggory felt. but it was no good trying to throttle his hope. It might, really, it just might be true. So many odd things had happened already, and he had had the magic rings. There must be worlds you could get to through every pool in the wood. He could hunt through them all, and then mother well again, everything right again. He forgot all about watching for the witch. His hand was already going into the pocket where he kept the yellow ring, when all at once he heard a sound of galloping. "Hullo, what's that?" thought Diggory. "Fire engine? I wonder what house is on fire. Great Scott, it's coming here. Why, it's her." I needn't tell you who he meant by her. First came the hansom. There was no one in the driver's seat. On the roof, not sitting, but standing on the roof, swaying with superb balance as it came at full speed round the corner with one wheel in the air, was Jadis, the Queen of Queens and the Terror of Charn. Her teeth were bared, her eyes shone like fire, her long hair streamed out behind her like a comet's tail. She was flogging the horse without mercy. Its nostrils were wide and red, and its sides were spotted with foam. It galloped madly up to the front door, missing the lamp-post by an inch, and then reared up on its hind legs. The hansom crashed into the lamp-post and shattered into several pieces. The witch, with a magnificent jump, had sprung clear just in time and landed on the horse's back. She settled herself astride and leaned forward, whispering things in its ear. They must have been things meant not to quiet it, but to madden it. It was on its hind legs again, and in a moment, and his neigh was like a scream. It was all hooves and teeth and eyes and tossing mane. Only a splendid rider could have stayed on its back. Before Diggory had recovered his breath, a good many other things began to happen. A second hansom dashed up close behind the first. Out of it there jumped a fat man in a frock coat and a policeman. Then came a third hansom, with 2 more policemen in it. After it came about 20 people, mostly errand boys, on bicycles, all ringing their bells and letting out cheers and catcalls. Last of all came a crowd of people on foot, all very hot with running, but obviously enjoying themselves. Windows shot up in all the houses of that street, and a housemaid or a butler appeared at every front door. They wanted to see the fun. Meanwhile, an old gentleman had begun to struggle shakily out of the ruins of the first hansom. Several people rushed forward to help him, but as one pulled him one way, another, perhaps he would have gotten out quite quickly on his own. Diggory guessed that the old man must be Uncle Andrew, but you couldn't see his face. His tall hat had been bashed down over it. Diggory rushed out and joined the crowd. That's the woman, cried the fat man, pointing at Jadis. "Do your duty, constable. Hundreds and thousands of pounds worth she's taken out of my shop. Look at that rope of pearls round her neck. That's mine. And she's given me a black eye, too, what's more." "That she has, governor," said one of the crowd, and as lovely a black eye as I'd wish to see. Beautiful bit of work that must have been. Gor, ain't she strong, then? You ought to put a nice raw beefsteak on it, mister. That's what it wants," said a butcher's boy. "Now then," said the most important of the policemen, "what's all this here?" "I tell you, began the fat man, when somebody else called out, "Don't let the old cove in the cab get away." He'd put her up to it. The old gentleman, who was certainly Uncle Andrew, had just succeeded in standing up and was rubbing his bruises. "Now then," said the policeman, turning to him, "what's all this?" "Waffle pommy shum," came Uncle Andrew's voice from inside the hat. "None of that now," said the police sternly. "You'll find that there's no laughing matter. Take that hat off, see?" This was more easily said than done, but after Uncle Andrew had struggled in vain with the hat for some time, 2 other policemen seized it by the brim and forced it off. Thank you, said Uncle Andrew in a faint voice. "Thank you, dear me, I'm terribly shaken. If someone could give me a small glass of brandy." Now you attend to me, if you please, said the policeman, taking out a very large notebook and a very small pencil. Are you in charge of that there young woman? Look out, called several voices, and the policeman jumped a step forward just in time. The horse had aimed a kick at him, which could probably have killed him. Then the witch wheeled the horse around so that she faced the crowd, and its hind legs were on the footpath. She had a long, bright knife in her hand, and had been busily cutting the horse free from the wreck of the hansom. All this time Diggory had been trying to get into a position from which he could touch the witch. This wasn't at all easy, because on the side nearest him there were too many people, and in order to get around to the other side, he had to pass between the horse's hooves and the railing of the area that surrounded the house. For the Ketterleys' house had a basement. If you knew anything about horses, and especially if you had seen what state that horse was in at the moment, you'd realize that was a ticklish thing to do. Diggory knew lots about horses, but he set his teeth and got ready to make a dash for it as soon as he saw a favorable moment. A red-faced man in a bowler hat now shouldered his way to the front of the crowd. "Hi, policeman," he said. That's my horse, what she's sitting on, same as it's my cab, what she's made matchwood of." "One at a time, please, one at a time," said the policeman. "But there ain't no time," said the cabby. "I know that horse better'n you do. 'Tain't an ordinary horse. His father was a officer's charger in the cavalry, he was, and if the young woman goes on exciting him, there'll be murder done. Here, let me get at him." The policeman was only too glad to have a good reason for standing further away from the horse. The cabby took a step nearer, looked up at Jadis, and said in a not unkindly voice, "Now, missy, let me get at his head, and just you get off. You're a liddy, and you don't want all these roughs going down for you, do you? You want to go home and have a nice cup of tea and a lay-down, quiet-like. Then you'll feel ever so much better." At the same time he stretched out his hand toward the horse's head, with the words, "Steady, Strawberry, old boy, steady now." And then for the first time the witch spoke. "Dog," came her cold, clear voice, ringing loud above the other noises. "Dog, unhand our royal charger. We are the Empress Jadis." And that is the end of chapter 7. So, the witch, even without her magic, still manages to cause quite a ruckus. No worries, though. We're going to continue on with chapter 8. I'm still feeling good enough to keep going. Here, give me a sec. There we go. "Oh, Empress, are you? We'll see about that," said a voice. Then another voice said, "3 cheers for Empress of Kolniach," and quite a number joined in. A flush of color came to the witch's face, and she bowed ever so slightly. But the cheers died away into roars of laughter, and she saw they had only been making fun of her. A change came over her expression, and she changed the knife to her left hand. Then, without warning, she did a thing that was dreadful to see. Lightly, easily, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world, she stretched up her right arm and wrenched off one of the crossbars of the lamp-post. If she had lost some magical powers in our world, she'd lost none of her strength, and she could break an iron bar as if it were a stick of barley sugar. She tossed her new weapon up in the air, caught it again, brandished it, and urged the horse forward. "Now's my chance," thought Diggory. He darted between the horse and the railings, and began going forward. If only the brute would stay still for a moment, he might catch the witch's heel. As he rushed, he heard a sickening crash and a thud. The witch had brought the bar down on the chief policeman's helmet. The man fell like a ninepin. "Quick, Diggory, this must be stopped," said a voice beside him. It was Polly, who had rushed down the moment she was allowed out of bed. "You are a brick," said Diggory. Hold on to me tight. You'll have to manage the ring. Yellow, remember, And don't put it on till I shout." There was a second crash, and another policeman crumpled. There came an angry roar for the crowd. "Pull her down. Get a few paving stones. Call out the military." But most of them were getting as far away as they could. The cabby, however, obviously the bravest as well as the kindest person present, was keeping close to the horse, dodging this way and that to avoid the bar, but still trying to catch Strawberry's head. The crowd booed and bellowed again. A stone whistled over Diggory's head, and then came the voice of the witch, clear like a great bell, and sounding as if, for once, she were almost happy. "Scum! You shall pay dearly for this when I have conquered your world. Not one stone of your city will be left. It will be made as Charn, as Felinda, as Sorless, as Bramandin." Diggory at last caught her ankle. She kicked back with her heel and hit him in the mouth. In his pain he lost hold. His lip was cut and his mouth full of blood. From somewhere very close by came the voice of Uncle Andrew in a sort of scream. "Madam, my dear young lady, for heaven's sake compose yourself." Diggory made a second grab at her heel, and was again shaken off. More men were knocked down by the iron bar. He made a third grab, caught the heel, held on like grim death, shouting, "Polly, go!" And then, oh, thank goodness, the angry, frightened faces had vanished. The angry, frightened voices were silenced, all except Uncle Andrew's. Close beside Diggory in the darkness, it was wailing, "Oh, oh, is this delirium? Is this the end? I can't bear it. It's not fair. I never meant to be a magician. It's all a misunderstanding. It's all my godmother's fault. I must protest against this. In my state of health, too. A very old Dorsetshire family." "Bother," thought Diggory. "We didn't want to bring him along. My hat, what a picnic." "Are you there, Polly?" "Yes, I'm here." "Don't keep on shoving." "I'm not," began Diggory, but before he could say anything more, their heads came out into the warm green sunshine of the wood, and as they stepped out of the pool, Polly cried out, "Oh, look! We've brought the old horse with us, too, and Mr. Ketterly, and the cabby. This is a pretty kettle of fish." As soon as the witch saw that she was once more in the wood, she turned pale, and bent down till her face touched the mane of the horse. You could see she felt deadly sick. Uncle Andrew was shivering, but Strawberry, the horse, shook its head, gave a cheerful whinny, and seemed to feel better. He became quiet for the first time since Diggory had seen him. His ears, which had been laid flat on his skull, came into their proper position, and the fire went out of his eyes. "That's right, old boy," said the cabby, slapping Strawberry's neck. "That's better. Take it easy." Strawberry did the most natural thing in the world, being very thirsty, and no wonder. He walked slowly across to the nearest pool, and stepped into it to have a drink. Diggory was still holding the witch's heel, and Polly was holding onto Diggory's hand. One of the cabby's hands was on Strawberry, and Uncle Andrew, still very shaky, had just grabbed the cabby's other hand. "Quick," said Polly, with a look at Diggory. "Greens." So the horse never got his drink. Instead, the whole party found themselves sinking into darkness. Strawberry neighed. Uncle Andrew whimpered. Diggory said, "That was a bit of luck." There was a short pause. Then Polly said, "Oughtn't we be nearly there now?" "We do seem to be somewhere," said Diggory. "At least I'm standing on something solid." "Why, so am I, now that I come to think of it," said Polly. "But why is it so dark? I say, do you think we'd gotten in the wrong pool?" "Perhaps this is Charn," said Diggory, "only we've gone back in the middle of the night." "This is not Charn," came the witch's voice. "This is an empty world. This is nothing." And really it was uncommonly like nothing. There were no stars. It was so dark that they couldn't see one another at all, and it made no difference whether you kept your eyes shut or open. Under their feet there was a cold, flat something, which might have been earth, and was certainly not grass or wood. The air was cold and dry, and there was no wind. "My doom has come upon me," said the witch in a voice of horrible calmness. "Oh, don't say that," babbled Uncle Andrew. "My dear young lady, pray don't say such things. It can't be as bad as that. Ah, cabman, my good man, what, you don't happen to have a flask about you? A drop of spirits is just what I need." Now then," came the cabby's voice, a good, firm, hearty voice. "Keep cool, everyone, that's what I say. No bones broken, anyone? Good. Well, there's something to be thankful for, straight away, and more than anyone could expect after falling all that way. Now, if we've fallen down some diggings, as it might be, for a new station of the underground, someone will come and get us presently, see? And if we're dead, which I don't deny it might be, well, you've got to remember that worse things happen at sea, and a chap's got to die sometime. And there ain't nothing to be afraid of if a chap's led a decent life. And if you ask me, I think the best thing we could do to pass the time would be to sing a hymn." And he did. He struck up at once a harvest thanksgiving hymn, all about crops being safely gathered in. It was not very suitable to a place which felt as if nothing had ever grown there since the beginning of time, but it was the one he could remember best. He had a fine voice, and the children joined in. It was very cheering. Uncle Andrew and the witch did not join in. Toward the end of the hymn, Diggory felt something plucking at his elbow, and from a general smell of brandy and cigars and good clothes, he decided it must be Uncle Andrew. Uncle Andrew was cautiously pulling him away from the others. When they had gone a little distance, the old man put his mouth close to Diggory's ear, that it tickled, and he whispered, "Now, my boy, slip on your ring. Let's be off." But the witch had very good ears. "Fool," came her voice, and she leapt off the horse. "Have you forgotten that I can hear men's thoughts? Let go the boy. If you attempt treachery, I will take such vengeance upon you as never was heard of in all the worlds from the beginning. And," added Diggory, "if you think I'm such a mean pig as to go off and leave Polly, and the cabby and the horse, in a place like this, you're well mistaken." "You're a very naughty and impertinent little boy," said Uncle Andrew. "Hush," said the cabby. They all listened. In the darkness, something was happening at last. A voice had begun to sing. It was very far away, and Diggory found it hard to decide from what direction it was coming. Sometimes it seemed to come from all directions at once. Sometimes it was almost as though it was coming out of the earth beneath them. Its lower notes were deep enough to be the voice of the earth itself. There were no words. There was hardly even a tune, but it was, beyond comparison, the most beautiful noise he had ever heard. It was so beautiful he could hardly hear it. The horse seemed to like it too. He gave a sort of whinny a horse would give if, after years of being a cab horse, it found itself back in the old field where it had played as a foal, and someone whom it remembered and loved coming across the field to bring it a lump of sugar. "God," said the cabby, "ain't it lovely?" Then two wonders happened at the same moment. One was that the voice was suddenly joined by other voices, more voices than you could possibly count. They were in harmony with it, but far higher up the scale, cold, tingling, silvery voices. The second wonder was that the blackness overhead, all at once, was blazing with stars. They didn't come out gently one by one, as they do on a summer evening. One moment there had been nothing but darkness, next moment 1,000,000 points of light leapt out, single stars, constellations, and planets, brighter and bigger than any in our world. There were no clouds. The new stars and the new voices began at exactly the same time. If you had seen and heard it, as Diggory did, you would have felt quite certain that it was the stars themselves which were singing, and that it was the first voice, the deep one, which had made them appear and made them sing. "Glory be," said the cabby. "I'd have been better man all my life if I'd known there were things like this." The voice on the earth was now louder and more triumphant, but the voices in the sky, after singing loudly with it for some time, began to get fainter, and now something else was happening. Far away and down near the horizon, the sky began to turn gray. A light wind, very fresh, began to stir. The sky, in that one place, grew slowly and steadily paler. You could see shapes of hills standing up, dark against it. All the time the voice went on singing. There, just a sec. Alright, there we go. See, the voice went on singing. There was soon light enough for them to see one another's faces. The cabbie and the two children had open mouths and shining eyes. They were drinking in the sound, and they looked as if it reminded them of something Uncle Andrew's mouth. It reminded them of something. Uncle Andrew's mouth was open too, but not open with joy. He looked up more as if his chin had simply dropped away from the rest of his face. His shoulders were stooped and his knees shook. He was not liking the voice. If he could have got away from it by creeping into a rat's hole, he would have done so. But the witch looked as if, in a way, she understood the music better than any of them. Her mouth was shut, her lips were pressed together, and her fists were clenched. Ever since the song began, she had felt this whole world was filled with magic different from hers and stronger. She hated it. She would have smashed that whole world, or all worlds, to pieces if it would only stop the singing. The horse stood with its ears well forward and twitching. Every now and then it snorted and stamped the ground. It no longer looked like a tired old cab horse. You could now well believe that its father had been in battles. The eastern sky changed from white to pink, and from pink to gold. The voice rose and rose until all the air was shaking with it. And just as it swelled to the mightiest and most glorious sound it yet produced, the sun arose. Diggory had never seen such a sun. The sun above the ruins of Charn had looked older than ours. This looked younger. You can imagine that it laughed for joy as it came up. And as its beams shot across the land, the travelers could see for the first time what sort of place they were in. It was a valley, through which a broad, swift river wound its way, flowing eastward toward the sun. Southward there were mountains. Northward there were lower hills, but it was a valley of mere earth, rock, and water. There was not a tree, not a bush, not a blade of grass to be seen. The earth was of many colors. They were fresh, hot, and vivid. They made you feel excited until you saw the singer himself. Then you forgot everything else. It was a lion, huge, shaggy, and bright. It stood facing the risen sun. Its mouth was wide open in song, and it was about 300 yards away. "This is a terrible world," said the witch. "We must fly at once. Prepare the magic." "I quite agree with you, madam," said Uncle Andrew. "A most disagreeable place. Completely uncivilized. If only I were a younger man and I had a gun." "Garn," said the cabbie. "You don't think you could shoot him, do you?" "And who would?" said Polly. "Prepare the magic, old fool," said Jadis. "Certainly, madam," said Uncle Andrew cunningly. "I must have both the children touching me. Put on your homeward ring at once, Diggory." He wanted to get away without the witch. "Oh, it's the rings, is it?" cried Jadis. She would have had her hands in Diggory's pocket before you could say knife, but Diggory grabbed Polly and shouted out, "Take care! If either of you come half an inch nearer, we two will vanish, and you'll be left here for good. Yes, I have a ring in my pocket that will take Polly and me home. And look, my hand is just ready. So keep your distance. I'm sorry about you," he looked at the cabbie, "and about the horse, but I can't help that. As for you two," he looked at Uncle Andrew and the Queen, "you're both magicians. You ought to enjoy living together." "Hold your noise, everyone," said the cabbie. "I want to listen to the music." For the song had now changed. And that is the end of chapter 8. I'll continue to, actually today is Wednesday, so I'm going to be continuing Monday with chapter 9 and another picture book then. So this is going to be, normally Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday at 9 o'clock every night. And yeah, pretty simple. So I will see all of you on Wednesday. I look forward to it. Good night, everybody.